Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the May edition of the Divorce Support Club in conjunction with Walker Family Law. My name is Claire Macklin. I'm your host today. I'm a divorce coach and I work alongside clients who are navigating their way through divorce and beyond to help them create new, exciting, and fulfilling lives post-divorce. Natasha, would you like to introduce yourself today? Natasha's here from Walker Family Law for us this afternoon.
Thanks, Claire. Yes, I'm Natasha Alsop, and I'm a solicitor in our family department here, predominantly dealing with children, private children work, divorce, family finances, injunctions, so some domestic abuse work. I've been practicing for over 20 years, mainly in the Southwest, throughout in the Southwest, mainly in Devon, and have been with Walker Family Law for just over a year.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Natasha. So the Divorce Support Club is or was set up in 2020, I think now, to provide a different level of service to Walker Family Law's clients. We're here to help you concentrate on yourself, to become calm, to gain clarity, to really think about what perhaps your choices are moving forward, to feel confident in your communication, and ultimately to help you create a new life post-divorce. And today we're going to talk about whether divorce can ever be a good thing. And I was thinking about this before the session, what we hear in the media and the kind of language that is used around divorce is really not very helpful always. We hear about broken homes, we hear about failed marriages, we hear about marriages falling apart, we talk about custody battles, and that made me think, custody is something we talk about in relation to criminals. So why are we talking about in those terms in relation to children? And there's often a lot of judgment. There's judgment in the press. Children from divorced families somehow are expected to do worse at school. They're going to be more troubled. That if your marriage has ended, somehow you are a failure. And that divorce is somehow shameful, traumatic, financially ruinous. And perhaps you might be in a situation where your ex-partner is even using some of those phrases and telling you that you're going to be ruining the children's lives, or that you're going to be poor and living in a bedsit for the next 25 years, or that you're going to regret making this decision and you're going to be lonely forever. So Natasha and I today, we really want to offer you a different perspective on this, a long-term perspective, because both of us in our work, we know that while you're in the midst of a divorce, it can be painful, it can be very challenging, but in the long term, it can be very freeing. And it can mean that families are healthier and happier and more settled. And it can mean that you and your children can grow in independence, in resilience. And I think it's really important as a society, our views of divorce change. The law has changed in the last year or so, and perhaps Natasha can give us a little bit of info on that. But we need to perhaps to give ourselves freedom to do it well, to do it free of shame and blame. Perhaps society has still got to catch up with the law, Natasha.
Yes, definitely. So, yeah, on that last part, Claire, I think the law is trying to make it easier to go through that separation, because certainly in the short term, I think most people would agree that it is difficult. We don't see the actual divorce process as being a good thing. We don't look at it like that because it is difficult for people. But there has been changes with the divorce procedure. So people, if they've looked at some of your other seminars, will see that the divorce procedure has changed to try and make it easier so that we don't have to blame. There's no blame involved. So that has gone now. So if couples say our marriage is broken down, that's all they need to tell the court to progress their divorce. We don't have the need to say why it's broken down. That's helped, and I think that helps to ease the divorce process. But yes, I agree with you, Claire. Certainly my experience of doing it, as I say, I've been doing it for over 20 years, is that so many clients come to me in a year or 2 years or even 5 years if they come back for something different in relation to legal work, to say, oh, it was actually, in hindsight, it was the best thing that happened. And that's really difficult to see at the time, really difficult.
Yeah, it's really difficult to see when you're right in the midst of it. So one of the first things that we are going to talk about today is how divorce can potentially be a good thing for you as a person. So the first thing I'd say is it really gives you an opportunity to reevaluate what you want from and in your life. You are the creator of what happens next. So I talk a lot with my clients about what their goals are, what their dreams are, what their values are, and what's really important to them. Because, as we all know, relationships require compromise. Whereas actually life post-divorce can be designed around you. It can be designed around what motivates you. It can be designed around what gives you energy and what gives you drive. So some questions that you could perhaps ask yourself if you're listening to this might be things like, what can I do now that I couldn't do before? What do I no longer have to do that I don't miss? Perhaps there was something that your ex really enjoyed doing, and it took up a lot of their time, and it was something that you perhaps resented, or it was something that you sometimes had to join in with and you really didn't want to, and you're not going to miss that anymore. And what's on my bucket list? So I work a lot with clients around creating bucket lists for things that they want to do, places they want to go, as people they want to get back in touch with after their divorce, or even during their divorce. Another question might be, what have I always wanted to do but couldn't? So it really does give you an opportunity to reevaluate what you want from life. And Natasha, do you see that in your clients as well, sort of coming out the end and
I do.
reevaluating what's important?
I think it's a time for you to consider everything in your life, isn't it? When you've had such a change and a shift from the divorce, I think most people do then start to think, is this actually what I want to be doing for myself? Is it a good time now to look at where I might want to live? Sometimes clients say to me, actually, I was in this big family home and it was in the middle of a city and I quite fancied going, I like the idea of being in the country in a cottage, but we were in the city, so I just kind of went along with that. And so it might be location, it might be career. I remember a case where a husband had his own company, wasn't actually enjoying it, but felt this kind of obligation to carry on doing it because he thought that was what the family wanted him to do. And he said he'd always wanted to be a teacher. So he used the divorce and the process of it to say, take a step back and say, actually, this is probably a good time for me to pursue something that I want to do. And he went back to do teacher training. So I think whether
Amazing.
it's location, whether it's, the home that you're living in, your career, there's an opportunity, isn't there, to look at the whole picture rather than just the marriage breakdown.
Yes, there absolutely is, because the marriage breakdown can affect every area of your life, can't it? And so actually, if you can flip how you're looking at it from, all my life is all the bits are falling apart, to looking at it as this is now an opportunity for me to put those pieces of my own jigsaw back together, perhaps in a different way, and create a new picture.
Yeah.
That can really help. So yeah, totally agree. Another thing we talked about when we were preparing for this is shifts in how we look at failure. So there's a lot of talk on the internet and in self-help and so on now about looking at failure as being a step on the way to learning. It's a good thing that helps us to progress. And when you come out of a marriage, it's a really good opportunity to look at things like, where did I compromise and where did I sacrifice, and what am I prepared to do in future relationships? Or look at what patterns did I follow in this relationship, and what would I like to do differently next time? You know, who are the people that I've spent time with in this relationship, and do I still want those people in my life, or do I want to go and do something new and find new people to spend time with? Because if we can turn it around to look at rather than looking at it as failure, looking at it as feedback, or looking at it as steps up a ladder in order to learn, um, divorce can become quite a transformative experience. And I see a lot on the internet talking about post-traumatic growth. The
Yeah.
things that you can learn and develop can really shift how you live your life.
Definitely. I think we see that from clients. I certainly know that when clients first come in, and sometimes often, they're feeling in a really vulnerable position, and they might be feeling guilty or responsible, and they can't work out why they're in this position and their relationship in their eyes has failed. But yes, you're quite right, Claire, turning it into something positive and having a different view on it, which is difficult to see in the short term. is something that we do in other aspects of life, and we hear talk of it all the time now, don't we? And as you say, in other areas, but not so much in marriage. And saying, well, if a marriage ends or a relationship ends, doesn't necessarily have to be a marriage. If a relationship does end, what can we learn from that? And actually, am I going to be a better person going into the next relationship? And that might also be from a legal aspect. They've learned that although it might be difficult to have financial conversations in a relationship, which I think 9 times out of 10 people would say to me, it's really tricky to have financial conversations. I think most people don't feel that comfortable. But if you've had a breakdown in a relationship and that hasn't gone right, then you take from it sometimes financially into the next relationship. Well, actually, I'm going to be slightly clear about what I want. Or if you're buying a home together, you might want to record how you're going to own that home and all those things that you felt uncomfortable for. You'll feel more confident the next time round, saying, actually, I just don't want to have any issues later on. So let's just have that agreement. And I think people tend to feel that they've learned from that experience and they can move on and do something different next time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that leads me to thinking about, how we define, if we're talking about failure in a marriage, how do we define what is a successful marriage? I see lots of people who are thinking about whether to stay or whether to leave their marriages. And I think there are lots and lots of people who are sort of quietly miserable in the relationships that they're in. And they might have been married for 20, 30, even 40 years. So how are we defining what is a successful marriage? Is it just about how long it's been? Um, is a long marriage in which both people are unhappy actually very successful? Or is that something different? These people are perhaps not growing, they're stuck, perhaps they're resentful, and yet we're still calling that a success, perhaps. So that's a really interesting way to look at it. Does the ending of a marriage actually even make it a failure? There are probably still things that make that marriage a success. You might have two beautiful children. You might have grown a fantastically successful business, for example. You know, so sort of society kind of says that successful families are the ones that stay together, and anything else other than that is kind of some kind of loss. But what if that family is happier apart? What if that family is happy in a different format?
And I think society's moving, isn't it? I think it has already moved and it's continuing to move, which has got to be a really good thing.
Yeah.
Definitely changed. And I think more people can see that, that it's very subjective as to what is a successful marriage to someone might not be successful to the next person.
Mm.
But I
Yeah,
think you're right.
absolutely.
Um, you know, it's sometimes harder for a variety of reasons when a marriage has been longer because um, it's not necessarily right, but it's perhaps an image of a long marriage being more successful
Mm. Yeah,
for
yeah.
whatever reason, isn't it? Well, we've been married for 40 years, so it's going to be really difficult to separate. Um, you know, it makes it
Mm.
harder for people because of the pressures from society. But I think there's a shift in that. I think there has been a shift over time now, and I hope that will continue to happen for people.
Yeah, I certainly see a shift in older people deciding that actually this relationship isn't enough for me anymore and I want something different. That silver splitters, I think, is the phrase that's used about it. And certainly in my own experience, I know that I'm a much better parent now that I'm not living with my ex-husband and not feeling resentful about what he may or may not be doing and how long he's working and what money he might be spending and all of those things. I'm actually a happier and better parent on my own than I was when we were living together. And I think going back to something you said just now, society is definitely shifting. We're also living longer, aren't we? So we're living until we're kind of, I don't know what the average age is now, 80 something. And maybe the right person in our 20s isn't the right person for us in our 40s or our 60s. People change, don't they? And they grow, and they might not grow together.
Just as we were saying earlier, really, in other areas of life, we see changes more frequently now. People don't have a job for life; they change. They, frequently change career. Things happen as they grow, and that does also happen in relationships. And I think it's just, again, much more difficult sometimes for society, the way that society considers kind of a marriage as opposed to a relationship breakdown. I think that can sometimes be difficult as well. But yeah, I think people are living longer, and they do do grow apart for all sorts of reasons. And
Yeah.
in that situation, people say, well, we grew apart, and actually, it's a good thing that we've now decided to put an end to that
Mm.
particular.
Yeah, and I think in those circumstances, if the relationship is kind of you've both decided together that this isn't working for you both anymore, then there are some lovely kind of rituals that I've seen people do to actually kind of mark the end of that
Yeah,
relationship or the end of that marriage in a really lovely way. Sort of acknowledging the really great things that might have come from that relationship or the great times that you had in that relationship, because just because the marriage is ending now doesn't mean that you didn't have some great times, and that there aren't some really lovely memories that you can hold on to. So sometimes thinking of a kind of an ending ritual can be a really helpful thing for people to do.
yeah,
um Going back to something else we were talking about earlier as well, we were talking about how the end of a marriage can be a time to learn. And I think, certainly for me, my first divorce in particular was one of the hardest periods of my life. But it was also a time when I learned just the most humongous amount. So, that first divorce for me was absolutely not my choice, in the beginning. Um, but looking back, using my what I'd like to call my wow brain rather than my owl brain. So looking back and going, wow, look what I've learned, rather than now look how far I've still got to go. Um, I have a very strong belief now that I can deal with anything that life throws at me. I will survive and I will thrive, whatever life throws at me. And I guess that's kind of the definition of being resilient. Once you overcome hard things, you learn about all the resources that you've got. And, I really believe I have the resources to deal with whatever comes my way. And there are various reasons for that. And I think that, these are the kind of things I talk about with clients. I know that I can choose how I respond to anything. So I think without my first divorce, I'd probably still be doing a desk job. I'd probably still be a bit bored in that desk job. But instead, it was my divorce and then the things that I learned from that that gave me the courage to step out and set up a business of my own to help other people through that transition. If you'd asked me 20 years ago, would you set up your own company? I would have told you absolutely not. I'm an employee. I'm somebody who works for us. And I'm not sure now that I'd actually be employable because I'm so used to running my own diary and doing my own thing and setting up my own way of doing things. Um, and I've had lots of clients who've done really exciting things, taken really big promotions at work. I remember one client who had been offered the same promotion 3 or 4 times and had turned it down because she didn't believe she could do it. Actually, after she'd been through quite a difficult divorce process, she took that promotion on and absolutely flew, with it afterwards. And has since set up a charity providing palliative care in Ghana. People go on and do the most incredible things. And I guess you've probably got some stories like that as well, Natasha.
I have. I mean, I think that um, I, I've had, without giving personal details
Yeah.
away, I've had clients where, I mean, I can think of a lady who had been in a marriage for quite a long time. Her husband had all the businesses, but she was working predominantly within one of them and was very capable, but kept, questioning herself, well, my husband kind of started this company, or, it's his company really, I'm probably not capable, and was really doubtful. And after the capital split had been done and the capital comes, she realized that she had freedom with this money to do with whatever she liked, really. And she did go out and do that and set up her own business, with uh, riding school for children, and did really well. And I think, completely separate business, but she realized that she'd learned all these skills without knowing that she had. And then
Mm.
the process of divorce was quite difficult, but overcoming that, then having actually financial freedom to do what she liked because she had this capital lump sum and that was her money to choose how she wanted to do it. She did it quite differently. But you see that you see that frequently, really. People seem to have gained confidence
Mm.
in the long term. Again, it's in the long term, isn't it? In the short term, it's really difficult to see, but they gain this confidence. And I think it's because we know, don't we, that doing things that are really difficult, although you don't want to do them and you don't want to have to go through them, the process of divorce or whatever, to get the outcome that you need, actually by doing that and by overcoming those obstacles, it tends to make us feel stronger, doesn't it, to go on and do things
Yeah,
afterwards.
absolutely. I think it's a stretching of your comfort zone. So, if your comfort zone is
Yeah.
here and then you do something slightly outside of it, it stretches a bit and comes back, and it never quite goes back to where it started. And so, even in my business, I think of things that were outside of my comfort zone at the beginning, which now are kind of everyday things that I do. And so I think, going through a challenging time can be really transformative, and it can absolutely help people to feel so much more confident and realize that they've got all these resources that they just weren't aware of that they had before. They were always there, but it's about accessing them. And I think, going on from that, this is an opportunity for you to choose how you define yourself. So I remember thinking during my first divorce, I don't want this divorce to define me. I don't want to be the divorced person over there or the divorced mum at school. Um, and that was really important to me. I wanted to define who I was. I wanted to choose who I became after this. And so that kind of lit a fire in my belly, really, I think, to really be proactive and to change things, perhaps about myself, to change perhaps some patterns in relationships, to set boundaries perhaps in a different way, to be really comfortable and spend some time actually getting comfortable with who I was and what I enjoy. And I hear clients a lot sort of saying things to me like, especially if you've married a long time, it's really easy to forget what you like, what you enjoy, what colour is your favourite colour, because everything gets kind of joined up. It's like your roots are intertwined. And actually, this is a brilliant opportunity to rediscover what you enjoy, what brings you pleasure, and to say yes to opportunities to discover new things.
And not have to compromise, because marriage is
Mm.
good in the sense that we learn to compromise, isn't it? If you're growing up with siblings, you learn to compromise, you then get married and you're learning to compromise. But suddenly being in a position where you don't have to compromise because you're making your decisions, and
Yes.
it is your decisions, what you like to do. So um yeah.
Yeah. I think it's that learning that my happiness is my responsibility.
Mm.
And I need to take charge of it. And that was quite a hard lesson to learn and quite challenging. But once you get that, it's brilliant. And I learned that, I learned the hard way as well, that a new relationship wasn't necessarily what was going to make me happy. And certainly choosing somebody who was just the opposite of my first husband was not going to be the way to make myself happy either. It took me two long-term relationships post-divorce to really learn that one. Um, but my happiness now is my responsibility. I make sure that I'm happy first. And that also means that I'm a much better parent, I think. And actually, I think I'm probably a better friend because of that too. And things I hear from my clients. So I had to look back through some of the sort of case studies and things that clients have written for me. And my clients talk about gaining freedom, gaining independence, having a more adventurous, richer life. They're happier than they've been for years. They're excited about their future. And lots of them also talk about how their children have seen them handle adversity really well and with dignity, and have said things to them like, "I'm really proud of you." So even if it's really difficult, there are things that you can absolutely take from this process, I think, that you can use for yourself in the future.
Absolutely.
Um, I know that when we were talking the other day, Natasha, you were talking about financial things as well. So we were
Mm.
talking about
Yeah.
you moving out of a relationship perhaps you have different relationships with money, and how you've seen that play
Yeah.
out sometimes.
I do. And I think there's so many different scenarios, isn't there, with money? As I said earlier, money is a really difficult discussion to have in a relationship or a marriage.
Mm.
Um, Financial disagreements, sometimes not spoken disagreements, can be one of the most frequent. Not I say frequent, but definitely I have many clients who come in and say the reason our marriage is breaking down is because we just are not aligned financially,
Yeah.
and one person, wants to sell a house, one person wants to buy a house, one person wants to make a bigger mortgage, someone else wants the financial freedom of a smaller mortgage. And actually even day-to-day small things can become quite big because in my experience of chatting to clients, they can feel quite resentful, and then that resentment builds up. And I think that you often see people, even within a few months, saying, oh, I feel better off financially, or because they feel that they've got control as well of what they're doing. So they're saying, well, actually, it's just the money coming in now, and I'm spending what I want to spend in my account rather than having to spend all sorts of things that I wasn't happy about before. And they feel that they've got control of that. And that
Yeah.
can be a really good thing for people.
Mm.
And another aspect of that is, we were talking about longer marriages earlier. That's quite common now when someone will come in, sometimes in their 60s or 70s. And it's not uncommon for one person to have control of the finances throughout the marriage, not because, just because that's the way that their marriage has worked, and they've been quite
Yeah.
happy for that person could deal with that. I would deal with something else in our partnership. And yes, it can be quite daunting. And then, you overcome that and you feel like, oh, actually, I can manage this. But also from a legal point of view, it's sometimes refreshing for them when they know, actually, although perhaps all those assets have been in, I'll use the scenario of husband who's held the assets and he's got control of them. Well, actually, as part of this divorce, that's now going to be split equally, potentially, so you can have your share, and to take ownership of that back, which can happen in the divorce, through whether that's a capital lump sum coming to each party individually, or a pension, a share of the pension income. So they've got their own pension income and it's in their name and it's coming to them, which can all happen as part of the divorce. I think that does, again, we come back to the word freedom, that gives people control and freedom back over their own lives, when sometimes people don't feel that they've had that in a marriage. That can be, one of the reasons a marriage breaks down. So it's not most, it's probably wrong, but yeah, one of the reasons why people come in and say it's not working.
Yeah, I think as well, something you were saying then is really important. If you're the person who hasn't had the control over the finances, or full knowledge of all the finances, or whatever it might be, it can be quite scary to suddenly have control over your own finances if you haven't had before. And the client I was talking about earlier who set up the charity, I remember talking to her once, and that was the situation. They'd been married a long time, and that was the situation that she was in, and she was really frightened of running all her own direct debits, setting up her own accounts with various suppliers and all of those things. And what I got her to do was create a list of all the things that she had so far achieved during this process that she hadn't been able to do before. And once she'd got, she rattled off quite a few quite quickly. Once she'd got through sort of 10, 15 things that she didn't know she could do until now, she suddenly, she realized that actually I can learn how to do these new things, and it's not quite so scary at all. And actually it can give me a feeling of being really empowered. And that's what she could take away from that. Again, it's using that wow brain rather than the owl brain, and starting small. Perhaps it's starting small with just switching across 3 or 4 direct debits, today, and then tomorrow it's something else. So start small and build up those resources. I think that's, there's lots of things there. We've talked about how, divorce can actually be a good thing for you personally. Um, One of the other things that often comes up in my sessions with clients is around children, and the fear that divorce is going to somehow really be damaging for the children. That they're going to be living in a broken home, that it's going to really damage them emotionally. So we wanted to give a different perspective on this, perhaps. Um, Traditionally, it's seen as being kind of the right thing to do to stay together for their children. And I just want to turn that around and ask, is that better? Is it better to stay for the sake of the children? And there are perhaps some questions that you can ask yourself if this is the situation that you're in. And, they might be things like, what do I want our children to learn about healthy, positive relationships? What do I want our children to believe about marriage? Do I want our children to think that it's okay to stay in an unhappy marriage? Or do I want them to believe that it's okay to leave and move on from something that's no longer working? And something that I often do with clients is ask them to imagine fast forwarding their lives, say 20 years, and seeing your son or your daughter in a marriage that is exactly like yours, how would that feel? And what advice would you give to them? And sometimes that can really give a kind of different perspective for clients on thinking about this. You know, is it better to have two happy homes than one unhappy, stressful one? You know, people often think their children don't pick up on stuff, but they really do. Um, and you know, I think these are really important questions to ask. You know, what example are your children seeing right now of relationships and how they work?
Absolutely. And I think, as lawyers, we're not, I only know the research. So I read the research that's prepared by experts who say children are generally in a better place if they're removed from a conflict situation. So when it's separated parents, sometimes even without parents realizing it, the children are perceiving the conflict between parents, because sometimes it can be quite subtle. So
Yeah,
that's what the research tells us. So that children are then actually in separated families are generally happier, and that again, I think that the research also says that children do pick up on more than we realise, don't they?
yeah,
And staying together for the children, can sometimes be the situation where the children then feel responsible, that their parents are staying together for them, particularly as they get older.
yeah.
Um,
That comes up quite often. I think when I talk to adult children whose parents have done that, that have stayed together for the children, you know, that's actually quite a burden for those children, those adult children, to be carrying.
yeah.
Mm.
Um, but I think that, some clients that I see and then see 12 months down the line, I just think they have such an they've done it so well. And it's really hard to do because it does take both parents. And I think earlier, when I talked about compromise and the fact that you don't have to compromise anymore when you're on your own and you've divorced and you can do what you like with your money. And if you want to go on holiday to the Caribbean, you don't have to go, you don't have to go to the UK because that's what you wanted to do. But then that's different with children. I think the only compromise you still have to do is if you have children together, and it's inevitable. I think anyone coming out of a divorce will say to you the compromise they had to make was for their children, and knowing that had to happen because they had to put the children in the first. And
Yes.
but when that's done right, you hear some really positive stories of. I had a client the other day that was telling me that they still go on holiday. They go for one family holiday a year together because the
Yeah.
children want them to. They still get on, although I think, it was quite a difficult divorce, really difficult, but they do get on. And they will go from one family holiday a year. That's not for everyone at all. Some people it just wouldn't be for them.
Mm.
So there's so
Yeah.
many
That's an
absolute
interesting
things
one.
that work. Yeah,
Yeah, I had a conversation with a client the other week about exactly this. You know, was it odd that they were thinking about potentially going away for a week um, as a family again? And my answer to that was, well, if it works for you
do.
and your children and you are happy with that, then yeah, absolutely, brilliant. You know, what better example can you give your children than still managing to get on together and be able to be in the same space successfully,
Yeah.
even after your relationship has changed from being a marriage to being co-parents.
But that doesn't work for everyone. So I'm not
No, it
suggesting
doesn't.
if you're not doing that, then it's not working for
No,
you. That's quite an
absolutely
unusual
not.
situation that
It is.
I heard of. But there's so much. I would say to clients, if you are thinking, I'm sure it's been covered. We have covered it before, but there's
Mm.
so many resources out there. CAFCAS website, Children and Family Court Advisory Support Service, they have some great resources on how can I manage, compromises, how can I manage planning, how can we put a parenting plan together, an agreement effectively, which is what a parenting plan is, after you're separating. Looking at it again, it has to be for you as a family and what works for you, but it gives you some really good ideas on the CAFCAS website, resolution website. There's some really good resources on practical things you can
Mm.
do try
Yeah.
and
I think
make
our
happen.
family wizard as well has a really good template parenting plan that people can have a look at. and I do a lot of work with clients around where do they want their parenting relationship to be in 5 years, 10 years. So it's really difficult when you're in the middle of a divorce that feels really horrible and you're not getting on and you're perhaps arguing quite a lot with each other to think about 5 year, 10 year, 20 year into the future, and where do you want your relationship to be at that point? And that's what that really kept me on the straight and narrow during my first divorce was, when my children get married, I want them not to have to worry about who they sit on their top table, if that's still a thing then. I don't want them to have to worry about which of their parents they can invite and whether their parents are going to be able to be in the same room, with each other without any problem. Um, so that kind of thing, thinking ahead like that can really help.
And I know how difficult that can be with
Mm,
for clients initially, and actually sometimes in the long term,
mm,
it can be, but most of the time, it comes to a point where, you often hear clients say, oh, this is great. They're going, I have a weekend now, I have my free weekend, so that when, or free half a week or whatever their arrangement is, because there's all sorts of arrangements. Some people might have, the first part of the week, someone might have the second part, they might have alternate weekends, they might have half of school holidays. And then because, particularly if you've got young children, because they've got more time to do the things that they need to do, when the
mm.
children are with them, they feel more relaxed. I'm sure that you've heard that from your clients, haven't you, Claire? That, oh,
Yeah,
actually, this shared time is really good. And they get different experiences with both of us because we're separated and we've got different interests. We might have met new people, but we have different interests. We're doing things that we wouldn't have done before. The children
yeah,
are getting experiences, which is actually a really positive thing. So, again, it's very difficult to see initially, but that's what I hear from clients,
yeah,
as time
yeah,
goes on,
and
particularly with
certainly,
things.
yeah, that certainly corresponds with my own experience and the experience of many of the clients that I work with as well. If you can make those times when the children are with their other parent precious in some way to you, and perhaps reframe them, then these were times, for example, when I learned to dance and went on. I got really into cycling, and I can go away and do a whole day sportive, and cycle, I don't know, 60 miles or however far it is, without needing to worry about where the children are because they're with their dad. So yes, I think that's a really important thing to do, is to kind of reframe the time when the children are with their other parent. Um, and I know, what we're talking about isn't really, we're talking about not abusive situations, really, our conversation here. And I know you wanted to add some signposts perhaps around that.
I do, because I mean, in a small number of cases, um, divorce might be needed because someone's in a
Mm.
really difficult, abusive relationship. And I think for anyone in that situation, it's hard. It's hard to see how they can come out of it. But I just want, yeah, people to know. I'm sure that, we have got it on our on our website anyway. But there's many organisations locally in Devon. There's a very good one called Fear Free. Many domestic abuse relationship, assistance available where you can have one-to-one support, or you can have, there's so many resources on, for example, the Fear Free website. So if you are someone in that position that thinks, I know that divorce would be a really good thing for me, but I'm not really sure how to take that step, and I don't feel that I can come and see a solicitor just yet because I feel that's a step too far, then I really think, at least go and get some support from someone confidentially, from an organisation such as Fear Free or one of the other organisations that are around.
Yeah, yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. Um, so we were also talking about modelling when we were planning this session as well. And one of the ways that children learn is by modelling the behaviour of the adults that they see around them. So what you model is what they will see and what they will copy effectively. And we talked about this a little bit just now in terms of, what model of a relationship are you setting right now? But you can also think about this in terms of, if you co-parent successfully, then children are going to see parents who can communicate, who perhaps have a respectful relationship with each other even after splitting up. They have parents who they can approach with troubles, perhaps of their own. And even if your ex-partner is very challenging or very difficult, and perhaps you have to set very rigid boundaries with them, or you have to parallel parent, and you parent on your time and they parent on their time, and you're not fitting into that kind of model of co-parenting, actually those children will see you perhaps being assertive. They will know that it's okay to stand up to bullies, for example. They'll know that it's okay to stand your ground and feel confident. And so they will learn from that too, I think is my big message. And going back to what you were just saying about, abusive situations, they will see that it's okay to leave, and they will also see that it's not okay to be in a situation where you're perhaps treated with less than ideal amounts of respect.
Absolutely. And yes, I think, we hear so much about modeling within a relationship or long-term marriage where you have both parents there, and you might then end up as a single parent, or you might be living with someone else. But even as a single parent, you don't often hear in the press, for example, the benefits of children learning how to co-parent effectively. And actually we know how many relationships are likely to break down during the course. We know what the statistics are now. And there are so many benefits from children seeing how that works, and the compromises you have to make for children is something that they're learning and looking at all the time. And actually that can be successful. So you can look at that in a positive way,
Yeah,
rather than
absolutely.
we're having to co-parent because we've separated. Well, actually co-parenting, children can learn so much from that, can't they?
Yeah, and it's really interesting what
About
stories, yeah, it's really interesting what stories those children then go on to tell when they grow up about their parents' separation. I hear again in sessions, one of the fears that people often say to me is, my parents got divorced when I was 4 or 5 or 10 or 11, and they did it really badly, and I don't want to do it that way. So they have a story from their own family around divorce. And wouldn't it be great if this generation of children could grow up with a different story, and I asked my own children actually a couple of years ago how they felt about the fact that their dad and I weren't together anymore, and that they'd been parented sort of in two separate houses. And they felt very strongly that they'd learned to be adaptable, they'd learned to be resilient, they'd learned to be independent, and um, they saw that they couldn't get away with manipulating either one of us, because if they said to me, I'm going to go and tell dad about that, I would be able to say, well, that's fine, because I'll have a quick conversation with him too. And we were able to do that. So they probably have a very positive story about how we've parented them, even though we weren't together. Um, and children can create all kinds of stories if they're, if things aren't as positive as that. Um, and actually, that leads me on to thinking about what story or how you talk about your divorce to the children can also have a massive effect. Because what we tell them will be what they tell themselves. So we need to make it so that it's okay for them, um, and tell them perhaps what will change, what will stay the same. Not bad mouthing your ex partner, not criticizing. Because if you're that child, imagine being that child who hears, "Oh, you're so much like your mum," or "You're so like your dad," and then they hear criticisms of their mum or their dad. That can really cause them to question who they are. So I think that's really important.
It can be really difficult when one person is doing that and the other parent isn't.
Yeah,
And I'll have, it's so common for clients to say, this is so difficult. I know that I'm not saying anything, and then they're going there, and the resentment is still there from the other parent, and they can't hide it from the child. And you hope that that will ease over time, because time does help that. But I always just say to my client, the other parent, well, don't change what you're doing. You're doing the right thing, and you can have conversations. And we look at mediation sometimes,
mm,
mediation with children as well, with older children, mediators can do, and you look at all those ways in which it can improve, and it does hopefully get better. But as long as the
yeah,
parent who is carrying on doing that, carry on doing that, because that is the right approach that they're taking, even if, and it is sometimes difficult because the other parent hasn't got to that stage yet, but they are doing
mm,
the right thing in carrying on and supporting the children in that
yeah,
way.
yeah. I always say almost exactly the same to my clients. Focus on you,
Mm.
concentrate on how you're doing it, concentrate on being the best parent you can be on your time.
Yeah.
Because if you both descend into that, and that's when you get the situation where there's lots of high conflict. So, I really believe, in those kind of situations, children really just need one parent who's really stable and steady, and that they trust, and so on. and over time you just have to kind of hold the faith, and perhaps hope that what you're doing will somehow transpose itself across to the other parent. And if it doesn't, then at least you know that you've always done your very best.
Yeah,
And
and the children,
sometimes that's all you can do.
as you say about modeling, the children are watching you do that and keep calm and as you can. I know it's not always easy, but
Yeah,
keeping calm and trying to keep with what you feel natural doing, even
yes,
though sometimes you can be pushed into a different direction.
yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And then the last little thing that we were talking about the other day, and something that I've noticed in my own children, is that sometimes this can really deepen their sibling relationships. So my children went from my house to their dad's house and back again, and they were the constant in each other's lives. So they were always together wherever they were together. And they have a really my children are 20 now and 17, and they have a lovely relationship. And the young one goes to visit the older one at university, and it's all great. They've been each other's support through this, and I think it has perhaps deepened their relationship with each other.
And I hadn't really thought that was quite interesting when you said that, Claire, because I hadn't really thought about that before, I have to say, as in because
Mm,
I suppose that's you often don't see families, in terms of clients. But then when I look at friends and think about the friends that I've got that are in that situation or have been in that situation, and I do see that, that is quite common, isn't it? Because the
mm,
children are spending more time together.
yeah. Absolutely. And
Really.
sometimes it can deepen the parent-child relationship too, because you're able to focus on being the parent when you're with the children, and you can do some of your other stuff in the time that they're not with you. And I've seen lots of examples of when parents have really deepened their own relationships with their children through this period. And I was talking to a client actually just this week about looking at the relationship he has with his children as a relationship rather than time. He'd kind of got into a pattern where he was looking at the time he spent with the children rather than focusing on the relationship that he had with the children. And just that little subtle shift has made a massive difference in their relationship over the last 4 or 5 months. So he's not so focused on the time. It's all about the relationship and investing in that.
Absolutely.
So
I think I think when we started to have this chat the other day, Claire, when we were talking about today's webinar, we were saying, I think I was probably saying that by the time clients often come to see us, although still sometimes going back to relate on and off, sometimes they see us early on and then they go back to relate for another 6 months, it might be a year, 2 years. But when they finally say, actually, that's it, it's not working, I just hope there'll be a shift. There'll continue to be a shift in society that sees that as, like you were saying earlier, let's just celebrate the marriage that we've had and how well we did it until it didn't carry on working out, rather than seeing it as a failure, really.
yeah, I think that's the big message, isn't it?
I think so, and I hope that continues to change. And I think more people talk about it in that way and looking at the positive ways and what you can take from it. Because I think most clients that come back to us say, "Oh, it was the best thing I did. It was difficult for me to see at the time." Most people do say that was the best thing that ever happened.
Yeah,
Um, if you chat to friends, they often say the same. It was, I just needed to do it, but it's the fear, isn't it, of doing something,
mm,
and
yeah,
once
yeah.
you've
It's
got to that,
often fear of the unknown, yeah,
mm,
and fear of the uncertainty, and fear of the stigma, and fear of the judgment, and all of those things. But having done it twice, actually, I haven't experienced those things. Um, And yeah, so hopefully we have been able to give people sort of a different perspective, even if you just take away maybe one or two points from today's session that can help you shift your perspective, then that's brilliant. And so just like to say thank you, Natasha, for all
yeah,
of your input, and all of your wisdom and experience that you brought to the session. So thank you very much.
thanks so much, Claire.
And we will see everybody next month.